everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're presenting the fire problem and why current evacuation systems are fundamentally broken. My name is Komal,
My name is Pranav.
and we're a team of 4 engineers passionate about building safer and more responsive systems. To understand our problem, let's start with a simple scenario. Imagine you're inside a large building when the fire alarm suddenly goes off. People rush towards the exits, some follow signs, others follow the crowds, but no one actually knows where the fire or smoke is actually spreading. In that moment, people are forced to make life critical decisions with almost no information.
During a fire, occupants must decide where to go without knowing where the fire is, where the smoke is spreading, or which exits are actually unsafe. So evacuation decisions are often based on guesswork. And current systems don't really help with that. Exit signs can't adapt, maps become outdated instantly as the fire spreads, and people follow familiar routes instead of the safer ones. In fact, studies show that herding behavior can increase evacuation time by up to 50%, even when better exits are available. So when safe paths do exist, people don't often take them.
We saw this play out in the Grenfell Tower fire in 2017. Residents followed official guidance and stayed in place, believing that it was safer. But as the fire spread rapidly, they had no real time information about changing conditions. Tragically, this day, 72 people lost their lives. This highlights a critical problem. Occupants lack real time information about where danger is spreading during a fire. And this is not an isolated issue, this is a global problem. In the US alone, there are over 1.38 million fires every single year. Globally, fires are causing 180,000 deaths annually, along with billions in property damage. And the impact goes beyond just occupants. Occupants are making unsafe decisions and miss exits. Emergency responders operate with limited visibility. Building operators face financial and legal risk. And as cities grow, societies as a whole becomes a lot more exposed.
To understand why this problem persists, we need to look at how evacuation systems were designed over the years. For decades, evacuation systems have relied on three main things: fire alarms, exit signs, and maps. But all of these systems are static. They assume evacuation routes don't change, even though fires actually do. And this problem is only getting worse. Buildings today are larger, more complex, and harder to navigate, as you can see here. Fires spread dynamically, but our systems don't currently adapt. Looking ahead, this challenge will only grow. By 2050, 68% of the world's population is anticipated to live in urban areas. Cities like Toronto are already rapidly expanding with high-rise buildings. And in these environments specifically, exits are often not visible. People rely entirely on signage, which again is static.
So, despite all of our technology, evacuation is still fundamentally broken. There have been many attempts to improve fire safety. Fire alarms detect emergencies, sensors monitor smoke and heat, and buildings run evacuation drills. But the problem is that all of these focus on detection, not guidance. As we saw in Grenfell, even when danger is detected, there's no way to guide people in real time as conditions are changing. This can lead to a critical failure. Buildings can collect data, such as smoke, heat, and air quality, but the problem is that occupants never actually receive that data. So people rely on static signs, instinct, familiar routes, or the crowd. From this, we identify three main gaps: no real time communication to occupants, no dynamic adaptation of evacuation routes, no support for decision making under uncertainty, and this is not a failure of detection, it is a failure of guidance.
So the real problem is this: when a fire happens, how do people know which way is actually safe to go? Because today they don't. And in an emergency, any uncertainty can cost lives. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Team FireScape. So we'll start the Q&A round this time with Drew.
All right, so the thing that jumps out at me when considering this problem is who is responsible for instituting these improved safety measures, and are those the same stakeholders that have an incentive to address these problems?
There would be multiple stakeholders involved, as we mentioned. So I think initially the building inspectors and the people who make the code for different buildings, they would ideally implement sort of structures that would require these sort of infrastructures in place. And this would be beneficial to them because, again, it kind of removes some sort of liability or reduces liability risk on their end for any sort of fire evacuation failures. And it also improves evacuation time as a whole because as soon as we can get people out, the fire department and the firefighters can help put out the fire and start with fire suppression, which can also help reduce the overall damage costs when a fire is actually happening.
So, of course, one of the stakeholders we thought of were the firefighters themselves, and so we had conversations with them. We talked to Mark, who is a fire prevention officer chief, or captain, sorry. And so he mentioned that one of the stakeholders that would be important throughout this process would be the firefighters themselves, because there is a point where they go from the fire station to the actual place of the fire, in which they don't have information on the fire at all. And so with these systems in place, not only would it be able to guide occupants outside, there would ideally be a system that can also provide information to firefighters before they actually get to the scene. So the firefighters would actually play like a larger role than one would expect.
Just building on Drew's question, maybe if you could just help me understand, if you were to dig into the stakeholders a little bit more, would this help building codes, like buildings get to code faster, reduce their liability? What happens to them in that example you showed? For example, you know, I've read so many cases like this where people leave harm because they couldn't escape. What happens to them from a liability perspective when something like this happens? Were you able to dig into any of those angles a little bit more?
Yeah, so for example, for the Greenfell incident that took place, there was a lot of miscommunication with what was going on in the building because, again, as you can see, the fire changes pretty rapidly and situations change really rapidly as well. So because of that confusion, there were a lot of people that lost their lives. And because of this, the building was also held a little bit responsible because their systems weren't able to evacuate people in a safe manner. So that's why liability would be an important aspect for the buildings because they can reduce that risk.
When you look at the guidance problem being solved over the last 5 to 10 years, who's come the closest and why did they fail?
One of the really important things to consider when it comes to guidance is that something that might come to your mind is like, well, like, why hasn't anyone done it yet, sort of thing. And the reason why is because if we implement something like this, we want to make sure it's with 100% accuracy. Because even if there is one error, even if we're at 99.9%, there's a chance that we might guide someone to the wrong exit or like something along those lines. And so that is one of the major reasons why this hasn't been like put into place just yet. But there
So nobody's tried to solve the guidance problem over the last 5 to 10 years, other than lousy signs and.
There has been research done in place to kind of figure out that this is a problem and this needs to be addressed, but there hasn't been any direct solution yet.
Right, hence why the problem still exists.
Mhm.
But has anybody made attempts to solve it that has come up in your research?
No.
Okay.
Kelly, do you have time for? Okay, we have time for one more follow-up if anybody has one. If not, it's all right.
The earlier part of my question was around building code, because they probably have to kind of create the exit plans and the strategy. Do they experience this pain point as well when they're coming up with their layouts and plans? Like, is that a stakeholder for you?
we were able to talk to plant ops at Waterloo as well, and some other building managers, and they did mention that the thing that they consider most is the exit that is the closest. And so the problem that we're addressing here is we're trying to find an exit, or like we would want to find an exit that is the closest and the safest. And so they mentioned that this is obviously not something we can do because we can't really expect where the fire is going to start or how it's going to start. And so this is a pain point that they mentioned and something that, given a good solution, we could eliminate. Does that answer your question? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you to Team FireScape. Okay, are we ready for our last pitch? The afternoon is just flying by here, right? So our